Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to night 7 of the 2025 ChemKnits Chanukah special, where every night I am sharing a new yarn dyeing video featuring different techniques and colors, where we're primarily dyeing mini skeins of yarn, specifically Wool to Dye For's Platinum Sock and DK weight yarn that is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And all of these minis went into the Chanukah yarn samplers that I offer through the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, where the mini skeins are all wrapped up so people can unwrap them, swatch the yarn, play with it, and see how yarn dyed in many different type of ways will work up. There may still be some left. I'll link down below in the video description. Now tonight, I want to dye our minis as they are twisted. With a 10-gram mini skein or micro skein, there is a lot of surface area. There isn't a lot of yarn that isn't exposed on the exterior of the yarn. So we can dye the yarn as it is twisted and therefore randomly distribute some of our colors a little bit more if I use my yarn mop technique, where I'll have dye powder on my gloved hands and I can wipe it onto the yarn. And so as the yarn is twisted, if I wipe the yarn on in a section this big, it might actually give smaller sections of that color because the yarn is twisted. Let's go prepare these twisted minis as I pull them out of the bag direct from the manufacturer. We're gonna dye twisted mini skeins for this project, but I still need to pre-soak it. In this container, I have 16 cups of water. I measured the water. I never measure the water in these white basins, but we know about half full, 16 cups of water. And I'm gonna add 2, 3, need more vinegar, 4, 5, 6. I partition the vinegar I'm using into these little cups because it's easier than pouring from the gallon jar into the tablespoon marker. And now I'm gonna start adding the minis. And the reason why I measured out the amount of water and everything was because I was curious how much water would be left after I added 65 mini skeins, because we may not have enough water for all of this, but we might. Now, platinum is a yarn that is pretty absorbent. Actually, I did pretty well. So this is about, 65 mini skeins is 650 grams. Clearly we have some yarn at the surface, but things are pretty well saturated. I'm gonna let things sit for 20 or 30 minutes just because I will come and push occasionally, but we're not worried about white patches today anyway, so we could, in theory, dunk and go. But I just wanted to, I guess, see how we're doing. So I'm gonna set this aside and we're gonna do the exact same thing one more time for our fingering weight micro skeins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I do plan to dye some full skeins in this colorway as well, but those I can twist and then add to our dye bath later on. Now, this overall technique is one I've done for Chanukah before, but I did this with all of my neon rainbow colors, and I loved the distribution I was able to get, because since the yarn is twisted, when I wipe the dye off of my gloves on, if I wipe it across all that area, that's gonna give us 3 small patches of the color versus 1 bigger patch, which I think is so much fun. And the palette, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to show it to you. But I figured I may as well pre-soak all of our yarn all at once. Now, since we have no zip ties on anything yet, because I'm not gonna bother adding zip ties onto the twisted minis, I do want to just keep the fingering weight and the DK weight yarn separate. It's very easy for me to tell the difference between them just by looking at them, but I want to make it as easy as possible for future Rebecca, because once we start untwisting things, I will want to be adding them to zip ties. But anyway, I'll see you in a little bit with all the colors. So on my acid dye containers, I tape parts of the poster that I printed out. And I use this sometimes when I'm playing with color palettes. Even though the actual swatch, like that you would do as a yarn mop of the color, may not exactly match what is on there, but it's still a fun way to put a palette together. And this palette has me so excited. Side note, Dharma now has stickers that you can buy that you can then put on your containers. And I plan to buy some of those with my next order. But the colors I have pulled include fluorescent safety orange, tobacco leaf, chocolate brown, teal green, moss green, and sage leaf. And a few of these colors break, but I think it'll give a very fall, fun colorway with pops of white. But I also think I'm gonna do this a little bit in stages and hopefully without untwisting the minis to the best of my ability. So we'll see how it goes. But I think that one of the first things I need to do is pop on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves to start partitioning the dye powders into little cups. The dye powders that I'm gonna have are over time going to become wet. They're going to become almost like a paste or a slurry as I dip damp hands in them, get some of the dye, wipe it on the yarn, go back in the next color, etc., etc. And so for this reason, I'd rather have the powders out in different containers to start with instead of going back into these containers, even though I know I can grab more dye as needed. And I do plan to have some yarn mops on hand for our project today. So after I take the dye on my gloves and wipe it on the twisted minis, I'm gonna go pre-soak this in the same, as soon as I remove the minis, I'll pre-soak this in some of that same water. But then I'll wipe whatever is left off of on here before going into the next color. So that way I can try to avoid blending these dyes in those colors that I've partitioned. I hope that makes sense. I'm showing you guys some of my events out of order, and because I haven't technically done anything with the dyes yet, but I'm showing that earlier, and this is just so that way I don't have to wear the mask now when I talk. So my plan is to take some of these 10-gram Miniskeins. I'm squeezing out most of the water, and then I'm laying them out just kind of neatly in the container, because as I go through with each color, I can wipe the colors across like so. Now what I don't know yet is if I'm gonna do all 6 colors all at once, or if I'm gonna do 3 colors and then steam set and then do the other 3. I think it depends on how much I feel some of these colors moving around. But I will say that the more I manipulate these Miniskeins, the more likely they are to become untwisted. So that is something else that is just worth keeping in mind. And actually I can compress things even more. I'm not counting how many of these micro skeins I'm adding because that doesn't really matter. I'll count after I've added them all, so then I can get a feel for how many batches I'm going to do. Some of them may have more liquid than others, which is also quite okay. But now let's see how many I actually added. 29. Maybe I could fit more, maybe I could fit less. I think that this is going to be really good to go for our first batch. And so now I'll be back in a minute with all the dyes ready to go. And with my mask on. I will have things set up so that way I can put the dyes inside like a shoebox and put a lid on it, so that way like it's not just open dyes the entire time. So I got my plan. It's time to finger paint. And so my hands are a little bit damp, but that is okay. I'm going to take some dye. I think this is the chocolate brown. And wipe it on. And the goal, doesn't have to be in the same place, is to get a little bit of each color on each of these skeins. And I can go back and check. But then I definitely have more dye on my hand. And so here, I'm going to come and use my more traditional yarn mop to get as much of this off as I can. All right, so that was our chocolate brown.
I think that this might be the moss green, and I'm going ahead and like sort of pasting it on my fingers a little bit. That way, as I come in, you know, I can really like wipe it and it's less powdery, but I can tap in back to the dye if I need a little bit more. The colors can layer on top of each other, and that is completely fine. But I can also just sort of like draw lines. I mean, the thing, and you know, some of them may have the colors in 2 spots, some may not. But the point is for it to be a little bit random as well. You know, as I take this mop and I'm really not paying attention to where I'm adding the color, that is more traditional what I do. And I could have done this by untwisting the minis, but oh, look at me drying off my hand. But I definitely don't need to do it that way. All right, I think that this is our teal green. And so I can tap, I can wipe. Oh, but even just these 3 colors together is so beautiful. I'm a little bit unsure about my safety orange plan. But I think it should be pretty. I just want to make sure that I have some of each of these colors on each of the minis. Okay, but now I think instead of going ahead and steam setting it already and doing it in batches, I'm going to flip them over. And in this process, we are going to get color transfer. And that is totally fine. It's totally okay to get some bits of color that transfer from one mini to the next. That is not something I'm worried about. All right, sage leaf, which, ooh, it's gonna feel a lot like moss, but the coloration of it, and you can tell that when I'm adding it on right now, it is drier, because my hands are a little bit drier. Which is fine. It has a similar kind of feel, but it is a little bit less blue, I think, if that makes sense. And I can tap it on in little spots. Oh, this is so freeing. And I'm going to admit that I originally had a whole different, as I come in with a tobacco leaf, I had a whole different project in mind for this palette. I was going to do something completely different, but I'm really glad that I, well, changed the other project. I think that it came up with something really cool, but it's just fun because now here I am doing something different. And this was the tobacco leaf, which is like a very mustardy yellow color. Okay, and I'm thinking as I come in for the fluorescent safety orange, which is going to be like a very bright, like a lot of these other colors are very much more muted, more fall coated. This is a pop of color for sure. And I don't need to be adding it in like the exact same spot. I can sort of like randomly bring it through. But I think the last thing I want to do, now that I've like gone down the line and added all of these colors, is I think I want to go back to our teal green and just add a little bit more onto this side. Now I know I'm going back in the container, but I just had a inkling of wanting a little bit more of that in here. And like maybe I'm noticing like, oh, if there's an end where I didn't add as much, there we go. And our yarn mop is still, the color is still building on it. But you can see that this particular mop has a very different feel from what we have here in the pan. But now we're ready to go ahead and start steam setting all of this. And so I think my plan is to gather up this bundle of minis, and I'm taking it over to my steamer basket, but I need to wipe up some of this color before putting the lid back on. And I can just quickly wipe out what was in here. And I want to show you my plan before I reset for the next round. I have the minis steaming here. I've got the pasta insert, and I will be checking on the water level. But I'm going to add the steamer insert because I'm going to give this yarn mop a little bit of a steam while I work on the next batch with a fresh yarn mop. I plan to add more color to this one, but this is just going to give it a little bit of a set.
I decided I wanted to finish the DK round in 2 batches. And so even though we had 30 minis last time and I have 35 here, I squeezed everything in before continuing on with a similar pattern. Yes, at sometimes it looks like I'm adding everything in like a stripe and that it would give us something a little bit repeating, but I am trying to randomize it, and when these minis come into contact with each other, there'll be some color transfer that'll add to the randomness that we have on here. At least that's my hope. And the nice thing is that once I go and untwist the minis, if I feel like, ooh, I wish there was more teal, ooh, I wish there was a little bit more sage, guess what? It's no big deal to add on more dye and go and steam set it again. That is completely a possibility.
Okay, I just removed briefly the lid. This is our first batch. I'm coming in now with our second batch that was dyed very much the same way. And off camera, I am wiping out that bin to bring over the yarn mop that I do plan to add more color to. The second yarn mop is a little more pigmented, but again, I'm going to add more color to. And now I'm going to steam set everything for 30 minutes, because why not steam set those yarn mops? And I'll come back, I guess, when I'm done.
Why do I call this my yarn mop technique? Whenever I'm speckling yarn, I like to use my fingertips to pinch the dye to speckle it on. And during that process, I end up with dye powder on my gloves. And so I started using a bonus skein of yarn as like the napkin, the mop, to take that dye off of my gloves so that way I wouldn't be leaving any dye behind. And those colorways end up with random placements and blending and have been some of my favorites ever. And so sometimes I'll try to create this yarn mop style on purpose, which is what we're doing here. The main difference is that I'm doing this while the minis are twisted, which one other perk of this is I can make sure I get every single color I'm using on every single mini. Whereas if I was dyeing them in bundles, there might be some minis that got some colors but not others. And so this is allowing me to create something even more consistent that I am including in my samplers. It has been 30 minutes. The first thing I am going to do is pull out our yarn mops. Ooh, I've got some fun speckles on there. And then I'm going to carefully remove this. And now we have all of our minis right here. I'm going to reduce the heat to low while I do this, but I'm going to just remove this pasta insert. And then I'm going to dump the yarn into, it's hot. I'm gonna let the handles cool off. You can see that we still have water in the bottom of our pot. I am gonna wanna add some more before we do our next round. But I got some paper towels to hold on to the handles so that way I could dump the yarn out into a catering steam pan. And well, before I bring this over, I'm gonna add some water. And so this is the thing that is always worth paying attention to. And now I can put the pasta insert back in. And we want to make sure that that water level is below the bottom of the container. But I'm going to let this heat up. It's still on low, but I'm going to need to go and start dyeing up the next round. And then over here we have our steamy pile of yarn, and you can see, because the way that they were pushed in together, that we have like a line of white down the side. That is fine. Ooh, ooh, look at those neon pinks. Oh, it's so steamy. It's a little unexpected, but that's from the fluorescent safety orange breaking. Ooh, that's fun. I'm gonna wanna know if you got a pop of pink or not. I'm gonna need to let all of this cool off. You can get less steamy, and then we can start untwisting them. So I'm gonna just go ahead and set this aside, but I'm very happy with this color. I am so, so happy with the yarn I just pulled out of the steamer basket. And I know I could have done like a smaller batch and removed it and looked at it before going on and dyeing more yarn, because here I am dyeing more yarn before untwisting anything. So before I know anything about how this is all going to come together in the end. But I'm feeling confident because I like what I see so far. And as I think I've mentioned already, I can always add more dye if I don't like it. Now we're getting a very high contrast, busy yarn here that's gonna have a lot of white left. And there are some people who really don't like white left in their yarn, and that is completely okay. There are others who don't mind something that is high contrast. But the goal here is to have something that's different. It's very fall. I'm very happy, and I hope that you guys are enjoying it as well. The other fun thing is each individual mini is going to have a uniqueness to it. There might be two that are very similar, but I don't think there are going to be two that are exactly the same. And that also just makes this extremely fun, and I don't know, I am really, really enjoying this technique. As for the bonus yarn mops, when I'm wiping my hands in the middle of the skeins, those ones are getting like a lot of color blending on them, probably because my hands are getting kind of wet and damp as I go through. Normally, if I'm speckling and doing a yarn mop, there are two things that are different that gives us something more similar to the minis in my pan. One of the differences is that it's powder on my fingertips and not very much. So then when I wipe it, it sort of wipes off mostly in one little section and is concentrated in that area. And then I guess the second thing is that I don't cover quite as many fingers as I am here because I'm kind of finger painting onto the yarn. And so while I think we'll end up with similar like overall effects, this is I guess goes into why the yarn mop is way more blended and less patchy, because sometimes we can get the colors to feel patchy, if you know what I mean. And patchy does not mean less beautiful, right? So I'm just so excited. And then once I got everything in the steamer basket, I put the yarn mops on top and I let everything steam for 30 minutes before moving on to one final project. The technique today so far is very specific to twisted mini skeins and will not turn out the same way if I do it on twisted full skeins of yarn. But I still want to try to see what we get. So I twisted some skeins of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn that is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, and added it to the same pre-soak I had used for my minis. Then I brought it over with my mask and everything on and started adding the dye powders onto the full skeins. This time, we don't have as much surface area for all of the yarn. Think about having 10 mini skeins in the pan versus one of these full skeins. And so when I was wiping the dyes on, I did let myself go in between where some of the twist was a little bit, just because I needed more space to add color. But there's going to be a lot of yarn that is in the interior of the twist that probably won't get color. I expect we're going to have very big white patches with this particular colorway. Once I was satisfied with the coverage, I popped this yarn into my steamer basket, wiped everything up with one final yarn mop, and then let it steam for 30 minutes before removing it off camera. And I can't wait to untwist it to see where we end up.
You know, we have all these leftover colors, which I'm going to hang on to for now. Because in the end, we'll do either one of two things. I'll either add water and use this to dye some yarn. We can add water and add it to my Leave No Dye Behind collection. Or I can use them if I see any minis or the full skeins and feel like I need more color. So we have options.
Okay, it has been 30 minutes and I have my little yarn mop I'll go add to the others. And then we have our full skeins. I'm excited to see that there's some pink in here too from the way things broke. That makes me happy. But I'm going to turn off the heat completely, set this aside to cool, while I'm waiting for the rest of the minis to cool. To show off the minis, I have all of our DK weight ones over there. Still in the container, I have the fingering weight ones. And I guess I'll pop the full skeins just right up here in this glorious little yarn tower to let it cool until I can handle it, so then we can open things up. I mean, even if we just take a look at a full skein versus a mini skein, some of the comparisons are actually pretty good, and that our full skein really does feel a little bit like a thicker copy of the mini. But let's open these up, and we're gonna start with the mini. And so we do, oh, this is so fun. We've got a very speckly yarn here, right? There are some sections that have like more white. There's a lot more white than like what you could see before, but we have fairly regular color. Now, when we open up the full skein, we're gonna have some longer sections of white. I'm showing this inside area right now, and there's little hints of color, but you can see there are these big sections of white. The rest is off camera. But then, you know, if we look at the other side, we have these splotches of color. Now, I'm actually pretty confident that when you go and knit with this yarn, you're not going to end up yarn that is half colorful, half white. Because I don't know if you remember when I took a skein of yarn and sort of divided it in half like this, and half of it I painted one color, half another. Maybe I let some little white in the middle. I don't remember. But the colors went back and forth and back and forth. And yes, there were some larger stripes, but I think everything will end up being blended really nicely here. And so you can see that they're related, and even like each individual little color repeat, they're smaller here than they are there, which I guess makes some sense, right? But now I need to start opening up this yarn more and more, and I'm gonna start putting the yarn together in bundles of 10 or 15 minis. Okay, and now here, if we take a look at this bundle of 100 grams of yarn compared to the full skein, because of when I untwist them and lay them out, it randomizes the placement more. You get this like distributed feel of the colors that you're not feeling right here. But I think that this is a representation of how these colors might work together in the end, because you can see them a little more blended and mixed up. I think that this is really fun. Something is making me feel very like 70s almost. It's feeling, I feel like I can't say it with a straight face, groovy. Anyway, I'm gonna go back to continue to twist things up. One tip, if you're ever dyeing mini skeins like this and are trying to bundle them while wet, it makes it easier to count out 10 mini skeins while they're still twisted and then untwist that than it is to count them once I've layered them on top of one another. Just like a little tip from someone who's dealing with this right now. All right, let's wash our yarn. Oh, I love how like when twisted, you know, it had like a repeating almost feel to it, but then now it feels so much more random. I love this technique. I love how having them together like just moves around the different colors and blends and adds speckles. Oh, so fun. So I washed with a little bit of dish soap and realizing, I need some light. It is a bit of a dreary, gloomy day, and so it's hard to see. Now, one concern that we could have is that there is some powder on the surface that never dissolves. And so giving the yarn a really good submerge, making sure, well, I guess the zip ties were never dyed, so that's less of an issue. but it's possible that when you first rinse, and this is 300 or 350 grams, I'm not sure which. When you first rinse the yarn, there could be a little color that comes out, and I would not be immediately concerned. Because if you had a clump of dye on the surface, it could now be starting to dissolve. But I don't see any bleeding, which is fantastic. I'm going to keep washing the rest of the yarn off camera, and then I'm going to pop it into my spin dryer to remove a bunch of the liquid so I can hang it up to dry. And then I'm going to continue with our fingering weight minis, untwisting, bundling them, and washing those. So now we can go look at the finished dry yarn. This yarn is so pretty and fun. I am just in love. I love that I can know every color is on every skein because I'm pretty sure I put it there. Now, I don't know that every color is on every single strand of yarn in each mini skein bundle, but there doesn't need to be. Now, the colors seem so well distributed, almost like speckles on each individual skein. But that's because when I added them onto the zip tie, things were rotated in a bunch of different ways, and that sort of distributed the colors out. Things may be slightly more repeating, but I think there's enough randomness that I don't think things would feel pooling, and you'll get that speckly feel when you work with this. As I mentioned earlier, these color repeats on the full skeins are each larger. I mean, if we take a look at the teal, they are larger on the full skein, which isn't a bad thing. It's just a difference. And we have way more white. You could see how, I don't know, I think it's just interesting to see when you have yarn on the outside where that is located. The yarn mops are all unbelievably earthy because we have all those colors blend together. And I'm sure that a lot of these minis are going to feel different from one another. And one difference that we're seeing now when we look at, say, this versus the actual colorway that we dyed is that these minis kind of all stayed in this bundles as they were dyed throughout the process. So the orange that I wiped is all in the same area. You can see the teal in a similar area. And then you can see some randomness of how everything blended. And so I can definitely rotate things and it'll move around, but that is just one difference right now. I think that this will still give a very speckly and mottled kind of look, but just a bit different because A, there's a lot less white, B, the color sections are longer. And I know we're gonna have differences from how these look twisted versus untwisted. And so some of them may have more orange than others, but I think it's just fun and a great colorway to go along with our more speckly friend. There is one more thing I want to do before I go start twisting these up. Have you guessed it? Have you guessed it? I have to bring over my black light. Ooh. Oh, it is so fun to see those like little pops of color in here. Oh my goodness. Zooming in. It's like everything lights up, and then as the camera adjusts, you can see the orange fluorescent, but also the yellow, and in some cases, I don't know if on camera it's looking orange. In person, that's reading very pink or red. And the reason why we're seeing all these pigments is because of the orange, the fluorescent safety orange breaking. And even with the light out, you can see that we've got more pink and more orange and a little bit of yellow there. The fluorescent pink that is in fluorescent safety orange and the fluorescent lemon bind to the yarn at different rates, giving us that different result. But I don't know, I always just get so excited to see the little fluorescent pops. But the reason why I picked that color is not so that way we would have that fluorescent pop, even though I adore it. But I really wanted to have a color pop in here. And so we have a very like muted base, and then all of a sudden this orange comes in with this pop. And whether that is a ray of sunlight or a sunset peering through a forest or a flower, I just wanted something else in there, and I'm so glad that I did. Even though tonight's the 7th night of Chanukah, this was technically the last colorway I dyed, or almost the last colorway I dyed. Remember those leftover cups of dye that I had after dyeing the full skeins? We have at least one final leave no dye behind from this video because I got dye powder left in these containers. I added some hot tap water to each one and then poured some of these colors onto some of our Miniskeins, realizing that there was more color than I thought, so I brought in a full skein of yarn to also use as a yarn mop. Now, I'm setting everything up in this shoebox, but the plan is to not let it cold process or set at room temperature. As soon as a steamer basket opens up, I'm gonna go ahead and steam set this yarn and then wash it off camera. But then I will go ahead and show you this finished yarn because I've already filmed the rest of the conclusions. And so I want you to see what this pretty looks like too. I have so much fun showcasing techniques where things may be different on mini skeins than they are on full skeins. The one regret I have is that I never reskeined one of the full skeins, because even if I used my automated skein winder to reskein it, I still would have been watching to see, do we have any large stripes of white without color popping through? And I really don't think that that would happen. I think the colors would distribute pretty well. You might have like a round with more color and then a round with more white, but from my experience, things go back and forth pretty well, but it's not going to be as distributed as we have on our minis. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if there are any projects you would love to see me do on 10-gram minis versus full 100-gram skeins, please let me know down in the comments. I try to keep track of suggestions and then pull from them frequently as I am dyeing up more yarn. And while you're down there commenting, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. This is the biggest thing you can do to help support all of the content here. I post at least twice a week, and then sometimes we have special events like Chanukah where I'm posting every night, and it's a lot of fun and you really don't want to miss it. If you want other ways to support ChemKnits, you can join to become a channel member, get fun badges next to your name, and you can use the ChemKnits emotes, the custom emotes that I have that I know I use all the time. And then I also have my Etsy shop, ChemKnits Creations, that's filled with hundreds of skeins of hand-dyed yarn that have been featured in my videos. And in fact, in the shop, you can get a just one night skein. One of the full skeins dyed in the first 7 nights of Chanukah. And so if you want a full skein of the yarn from tonight to see how it might knit up differently from your mini, you can grab it. And actually, you could also order the ball winding service, and then I could wind it into a yarn cake where I would also be able to look and see if I noticed any like gradient actioning happening as I wound it. And usually when I cake yarn for customers, I also make a short. So there you go. If you want to see me cake up yarn or anything, it's an add-on service. And I mean, no promises that I'll make a short, but I often try to, because when you wind yarn into a yarn cake or a reskein or something, it gives you another view of the colorway. And so I like to show that in short form. But anyway, what do you think is going to come up for Chanukah night 8? Oh my gosh, I can't believe tomorrow is the 8th night. But don't worry, it's not the last night of the series. There will be 3 more videos after tomorrow night. 2 videos where I'm going to dye bonus full skeins. One is a Lurex sparkle, and the other is a really soft silk blend. And then we have the behind the scenes vlog, and I can't wait for you to see all of it. So I'll see you here tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Chanukah.